for joining us. For those I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Scott Thompson, co-CEO, founder of Acceleration Point. And over the last 15 years, I've just had the privilege of working with so many medical affairs teams around medical excellence, process improvement, technology, all the things that come together to help us do the work that we do. And as we thought about today's session, material review is such an integral part to all of our other deliverables, all of our other major processes, whether we're talking launch management and launch readiness or events or thought leader engagement. It all comes down to making sure that we have an efficient and effective way of getting materials through our process and shared for the organization to use. And while this is such an important process and it's always such a process that's put so early when medical affairs is being stood up, most medical affair review teams still face some very common challenges. As we've worked with over 35 medical teams, we're hearing the same ones over and over, whether it's driven by the volume of materials continuing to go up, the speed in which you're expected to get them reviewed, limited capacity on the team, and just overall coordination of the process. So today we're going to be sharing a best practice case study about a top 10 pharma company that our team worked with to help really optimize this process, and looking forward to giving you some very practical hands-on things that you can start doing today. Now, we really want this to be a two-way dynamic discussion with you. So if everybody could please do me a favor, open up your chat window. So push a little button, get the chat window to pop up, and let's just test the technology, make sure you're all able to talk to us. It would be good to know just what is your role in your organization. So primarily, are you primarily a creator, submitter, a material reviewer? Just put A, B, C, D, or E in the chat. So put B if your primary role is reviewer, C if you own the process and you lead the process. If you're in another role in medical affairs, just what role do you have in the organization? B and C. Whew, okay. Excellent. E, A, B, and C. All right. So we've got a lot of folks here that I'm presuming are maybe with some of the smaller organizations, but also you're responsible for both executing on the process, but also building on that process. That is, oh, Colleen, all of them. Jeez. All right. Excellent. Well, maybe one other thing would help us to make sure that we're giving very purposeful advice, because different life cycles of the material review process, Jeff will share, have some different challenges. So perhaps you could just type in a number, right? Roughly, how many reviews is your team responsible for doing each year? How many pieces of material? Just roughly, is it 100? Is it 500? Is it 1,200? Just put a number in, and let's just make sure that we're talking at the right scale. What do you got? Okay, around 1,000. Who else? Everybody, put in that number here. Well, 3,000 that you're reviewing. Wonderful. All right. Good. Keep those numbers coming in. It'll be really helpful to have that. About 100, Colleen. Thank you. Excellent. Well, as those are coming in, I think that gives us a little bit of a range, Jeff, to be talking to. Today, I am really excited to have Jeffrey Tucker with us. Jeffrey leads a team of material review coordinators that has worked across many medical teams. And in this particular case, we're going to be sharing how we turned around the medical review process at a top 10 pharma company. So, Jeff, welcome to our webinar. Really excited to have you here. And maybe just to help get everybody to know you a little bit and to know a little bit about kind of the team that you're running, why don't you just give us a quick overview of your team and the work that you're going to share with us today?
Sure. And thanks for having me today, Scott. Over the last 4 years, we've been supporting a top 10 pharma company, and we've probably been averaging close to about 4,000 medical material reviews annually, although this year in 2024, we're probably going to obtain about 6,000 material reviews. We work with reviewers around the globe at individual countries as well as in the US. And over the last 4 years too, we've been averaging about 6 coordinators, working about 600 materials per coordinator. Our baseline and our benchmark for capacity planning and workload allocation. And during that time, we also like to figure out how we're doing. So we've submitted and solicited responses from our stakeholders, reviewers, and agency partners to see how our customer service is doing. And so far, we've had a consistent average of 95% or higher year after year. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've been able to reduce some expedited reviews by 16% during that time. And one of the bigger aspects, or one of the major aspects of supporting this is product launches, right? It gathers a lot of attention. It has a lot of sensitivity. And with this particular case study, we've been averaging about 6+ launches a year. Sometimes they come proactively and sometimes they don't. So, but the team has done an extraordinary job in making sure that we've taken down those launches.
Fantastic, Jeff. We are so excited to hear the journey that you've been on, how you got there, some of the practical advice you can give to everyone. But one thing that I'd love to just hear from everybody, right? I would love to know, how would it feel, right, to get to this point where your material review team is each person is able to handle more than 600 materials, that they're happy with their job, that you've got raving fans from that CSAT question, that you've cut the expedited reviews in half. Just throw a word or two in the chat. How would it feel to get to this point? I'm going to ask you, Jeff, how it felt in a moment, but I want to just give everybody a sec to just kind of think about that for a moment. How would that feel? Confident, 100% confident. Who else? Everybody that's in here can answer. Jill, Megan, Mindy, Raina, jump in. How's it feel? Relief. Yeah, it can feel overwhelming when we don't have a path forward to handle all that capacity. Anybody else? Empowered. Wonderful, Jen. Thank you. Focused and not stretched. You got direction. Empowered. Wonderful. Jeff, tell us just for a moment, how does it feel to lead a team that is achieving this level of success?
Well, I think the word confidence was actually very well put. It gives them the autonomy to really manage the project, manage the team for every material coming in, right? They are empowered to be a strategic thinker, not a taskmaster, and they've ultimately been able to handle high volumes and ever-changing landscapes and tool sets. And when you have that level of support behind you, it does make the process efficient and very easy.
Awesome. Well, we are looking forward to hearing about the journey and getting our some practical tips for everyone. Along the way, folks, anybody who has a question at any time, please just put it in the chat. We will make sure we answer any questions that you have. It can be as strategic and big, or as practical as you want. So any question you have, put them in. We will stop along the way and answer some questions. So today, why don't we start? Where did this start? Did you like walk in and was the organization already performing this way, or was it a bit of a change that you had to lead?
Well, it was a bit of a change. We actually got a call about 5 years ago because the process was overly frustrating to everyone involved: agency partners, reviewers, content owners. In some instances, it was taking weeks or months to get content reviewed and approved. A lot of our reviewers today could probably tell you back then they felt overwhelmed, not just with the volume, but with the level of expedited requests. I think we can all appreciate lack of planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on ours. But I think the reviewers felt extremely overwhelmed. There were challenges to see the reviews or where the material resided within the process. And it was only getting more complicated when you had new product launches that came on top of the regular volume that was being reviewed. So it really wasn't a good situation given how important the process is, which is when we came in and did some assessments and started getting going.
Well, it sounds like quite the transformation. Today, as we saw, we have people involved in all parts of the material review process. And so what I think might be a good approach for us is if we don't get clear on the challenges that are faced by medical review committees, and if you don't share the challenges that you are facing, some of the practical advice might not make sense. So, why don't we start with going through some of the challenges that you faced? We'll want to hear from everybody afterwards if you're facing similar challenges or different challenges. So, be thinking about it. Then, why don't we walk through some of the key things that your team put in place that led to the success? And then at the end, why don't we give any practical advice around things that people can start doing today in order to make a difference? All right. Does that work for everyone? I hope. Mm, all right. So, why don't we jump right into some of the challenges that you're facing, Jeff, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So we've had a few challenges that kind of made themselves present in the beginning. One of those, which we continue to battle sometimes, are materials that get little use. I think a lot of us in our careers have gone through demand management exercises, and we try to eliminate a lot of the fluff or some of the non-value added elements to a process. But what we were finding was there were several events or several engagements that were taking place, and content owners would submit material after material after material. And then come to find out in the long run, only about 50% of those materials were actually used. That increases volumes, it increases reviews for the reviewers, and it increases time spent managing materials through the process. Kind of in conjunction with that, right, we have a lot of time that's wasted hunting down where materials were in the process. People would communicate via email, ask a lot of questions, try to understand where the material was. So a lot of what we've tried to initiate and put in place is more of a centralized communication and engagement opportunities through whether you call that weekly meetings or a shared email box or just a very streamlined communication approach to be sure to make sure those content owners understand where their material resides within the process. And then I'm sure everyone can appreciate too many emergencies, expedited reviews. One of the bigger challenges is that everyone's material is always important and it's always important than the next person's material. So we spent a lot of time trying to battle back the expedited reviews as much as possible. And we've done that through uh, a number of changes in the process and improvements, especially around proactive planning, which really gets down to the overall customer service element of the coordinator to the business partner and ensuring that they're meeting frequently as much as possible and try to tee up as many materials that are coming down the pike so that there's no opportunity for expedited materials. Also, there's difficulties in quantifying the reviewer capacity, right? I think one of the things that we've been trying to put in place with expedited reviews is to keep in mind that the reviewers are the ones who are going to have to react to these emergencies. And by managing the volumes that the reviewers are actually undertaking is huge for the process because if they don't have time to review, then your material doesn't get reviewed and commented on in time. So we've really put an emphasis on the reviewer capacity as it pertains to expedited reviews and just overall review, generally speaking. And then the process is also it's a complicated process. There are a lot of reviewers, medical teams, legal teams, regulatory teams. They all have to take their time to review and comment on materials. And someone who isn't used to submitting materials or only does it very infrequently really has a challenge in learning the process from soup to nuts. So we also spend a lot of time educating and we spend a lot of time in one-on-one opportunities to ensure that those individuals not only get it right the first time, but will get it right the next time.
Fantastic. Yeah, those are such common challenges we've heard from so many of our clients over the years. I'd love to hear from everybody in the group. So, just in a couple of words, what is your biggest challenge? It could be one of the ones we shared that the materials don't get used, that time is wasted hunting things down, the expedited reviews, quantifying capacity, maybe the process is too complex. But what do you see? Why are you on this call? What is the biggest challenge that you're trying to overcome? Drop that in the notes so we can make sure we prioritize our time there. Let's see what we have here.
Provide
Revisions and
recent.
resubmits. Absolutely. We should take a look at that. And I think Jeff has some guidance on that. Reviewers, let's see, content owners out of office without having a backup. Yeah. So when reviews are dependent on individuals without having backups, you run into challenge. Offline review requests. I'm sure Jennifer can talk about some of that. Outdated, unbalanced claims. Yeah. So as the materials are getting reviewed, how do you keep things up to date and make sure your references are referencing the latest data? Capacity planning, proactive planning. Excellent. So, if it seems like it's a pretty balanced set of challenges between really some of the capacity planning, the ability to getting the reviews right the first time and not having to resubmit and revise them, which can also lead. One of the reasons for that could be outdated and unbalanced claims. So, as we're going into it, let's make sure that we're drilling in to really talk about how some of the practices you put in place addresses these specific concerns. Okay. We have one more that just came in that content is submitted without context of how it'll be used. Oh, yeah, that is such a big one. And then that often I find is one of the reasons that things don't get used afterwards because it hasn't been discussed.
I think a lot of
So,
these challenges too really do come from the one submitted around proactive planning and capacity planning. A lot of these things could be addressed up front in a routine fashion. And in a lot of instances, if you don't have the audience to be able to do that proactive planning, it makes it difficult to achieve the rest.
wonderful. Yep. Last moment urgencies, right? Do not revise. Yep, exactly. Well, we hear you. We've lived in those shoes for years. And what we're going to walk through is really defining the role of a material review coordinator. One of the things that we found early on is that by putting a coordinator in whose responsibility it is to manage the process and not necessarily be the one in the process, gives them a perspective and an ability to do it in a way that they just weren't able to do without it being assigned to someone. And so, what we'll do is we'll start by sharing a little bit about what the role of a coordinator is. We'll give you a pretty detailed rundown on what the day in the life of a coordinator looks like. And then we'll go into some of the practices that this coordinator team put in place. So, Jeff, why don't we jump right into what is a material review coordinator? What is their role? What's a day in the life look like?
Absolutely. So I think you'll probably hear me say this a few more times as we sort of learn about the coordinator. But the typical definition of a coordinator suggests task mastering or tactical activities. And while there is an element of that to be detail oriented and a good facilitator and process focused, they are truly strategic thinkers and strategic partners as they move through the process, right? When we think about all of the day in the life activities, I do want to call out the tactical tracking here because it is important. You have to stay organized, right? You have to be able to create those placeholders and maintain trackers and perform quality checks, both at the front end and at the back end of the process to ensure that the material is good to go at the start of the process, so you don't run into any delays. It's finally addressed throughout the process, so you can improve it for distribution. But also, we want to think about facilitating the review, right? Whether it's through meetings or constant communication or resolving the comments in a one-on-one fashion with reviewers and 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 agency partners. There's a lot to be said about engaging with the business support groups to ensure that materials cross the finish line. But most importantly, we need to be customer service oriented when we're coordinating material review. We need to provide not only that internal support and guidance, but we also need to be improvement focused, strategic, constantly evolving the landscape of the process, constantly training, over communicating. And we partner pretty frequently with our system access people as well to ensure that the right access is provided to the end user. So when you when you bundle all of these aspects together, you're truly getting a combination of a strategic partner with a taskmaster, which is an extension of your overall team to ensure this process gets executed flawlessly.
Yeah, Jeff, I remember early on when we took over this process from an existing group of coordinators, there was this one medical director who pulled me aside and said, "Wow, it's so refreshing that you don't have somebody just telling me what to do. They're actually helping me get it done."
That's right.
Right? And I think that's a big shift for a lot of material coordinators is it's not a project management role, even though there is some element of staying organized. It really is making sure that it's easy for people to get their part of the process done. So, really looking forward to kind of the next piece here about that's what they do, but let's dig into how they do it. And as you first roll up your sleeves and you're trying to make some of these improvements, how does that even work?
There are three non-negotiable things that must be put into place to achieve these types of outcomes, and they're improve the process, provide that actual support, and you cannot do the first two unless you build a culture of continuous improvement.
Got it. So improving the process, provide structural actual support. I'm curious to hear more about what that means, and then build a culture of improvement. While we're when just as we're getting into these three steps, it would be good to know from folks. One more question, the last one I promise here, is how do you manage those reviews today? So if you think about all the things that Jeff just outline that have to get done. How do you do it today? Just put A, B, C, or D. So do you like, does everybody do their own? So every submitter has to manage their own process. Is a coordinator part of somebody's job in your organization? Do you have a full-time coordinator or do you outsource this to a coordination team? Just A, B, C, or D. Okay, C, full-time coordinator. Good, good. Okay, we've got about half are full time. So everybody on this line at least has somebody responsible for doing this work, except for now we have one, two actually, that have said that everybody's responsible for doing their own. Oh, more people, everybody's responsible for doing their own. Yeah. So one of the challenges that Jeff said, which I think was one of our biggest learnings, is that when the process isn't something that you do every day, it's something you do every quarter, twice a year, it's really, really hard to get efficient and effective at it. And so, you know, really making that shift to having somebody who owns that process is a substantial, important step. And we'll make sure the slide there that you saw is available, which is here's the roles and responsibilities for that person, so you can use it. So, okay, well, Jeff, as we're talking about this, let's just keep in mind about when we're talking about improving the process, or we're talking about providing support and culture, that we have about a little bit more than half of the folks on this line, they don't have a coordinator to help them yet. So let's make sure we comment on how they can do some of these things themselves. So let's start with the first step that you said. The first step was to improve the process. So why don't you walk us through some of the key changes, some very specific things that you find makes the process go a lot smoother?
Yeah, I'm going to use a two-word phrase here that sounds so simple and so easy, but it is truly getting organized. And if you're not utilizing a team and you are doing things on your own, some of these may be able to help just in your weekly routine. But what we've been able to do holistically is implement weekly agendas with materials on a roster to review for that week. And then leading into that weekly meeting, we facilitate offline reviews, working directly with the content owners and the reviewers to remove some of those materials from the agenda. In fact, it's quite funny that the team has an element of gamification to see how many meetings can actually get postponed to the next week because the roster of materials were actually reviewed and approved offline. The second piece of getting organized is really that proactive planning, right? Provide pre-review support, whether it's through concept reviews or does this need approval discussions, sufficient tracking and monitoring, but also the over communication with content owners and reviewers through proactive planning, understanding events that are coming down in a quarterly fashion and the materials tied to those events and otherwise. And then one of the benefits we had in this particular case study is that we also I managed a team of event management coordinators for HCP contracting and events management. So we had joint planning with that team. So whether it's a completely separate team or whether it's a part of the operations group that's doing the MMR work, I think at the end of the day, it's good to engage with those individuals that have the knowledge of what is coming up in the next quarter. Because if your material counts anything like our material count, about 80 to 90% of the materials stem from events and engagements.
Got it. So, Jeff, as you think about process, and we've done a lot of process improvement across medical affairs, one of the things that I tend to find is that the documentation and the training isn't clear enough that you don't depend on people's institutional knowledge to know how to get things done. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about your training and your documentation of these processes?
Absolutely. In fact, documentation is pretty much the first step in ensuring that when you're standing up a team or you're standing up some coordination support, that they have that for reference sake. So documentation was created at each level of the process, showcasing a granular level of tasks to complete each step, whether at the proactive planning stages prior to a material being submitted, or the step-by-step needs and systems and trackers to ensure the material journey is swift and accurate. So we created a library of documents highlighting each of these phases to not only help support the coordinator do their job, but we've also developed subsets of these documents in the form of like job aids or videos to provide external assistance and education to the content owners and the reviewers, especially if they're not doing that work every single day, or if they just need a refresher on how the process goes. So we continuously maintain the accuracy of those documents as the process changes over time.
Yeah, and I absolutely love that you can actually look in some of your trackers and in some of your systems and see if somebody hasn't done the process for a while and even proactively with their review request say, hey, as a reminder, here's how to do this because you might not have been thinking about it, right? Because you're busy thinking about medical strategies and engagement. And so making sure that those materials are accessible and easy so that you can share them in the moment they're needed is certainly a part of the success. Here's the next one, and I'm really excited to hear what you mean by this. So it says provide actual support, and the word support is bolded, but the word actual is intriguing to me. What do you mean by provide actual support?
So a lot of coordinators are just human reports. They basically send out updates that could have just been a report telling people where things are in the process and how many items you were behind on. That's not very helpful, right? Instead, the coordinator needs to be an active part or an instrumental part of the process. Medical teams are not focused on the material review process as their core competency is science, not operations. We constantly talk about this within our team is that our stakeholders, our content owners are not necessarily operators in nature, right? We want them focusing on the medical. We want them focusing on the science. We want to help with the operations. We want to move this through. The coordinator needs to do the work, not just tell the people what needs to be done. And here are some things that the coordinator should do, right? So we should be engaging content owners frequently for proactive planning. I think we said that a number of different times. And I can't emphasize that enough because it really does eliminate a lot of the obstacles that uh, you could engage in throughout the process. We should be consistently communicating with our stakeholders so that they understand where the material resides in the process at any given moment. And then, as part of that strategic partner, we should be providing education and guidance in all situations throughout the process so that content owners, reviewers, agency partners can avoid as many delays as they can, but also ensuring that materials meet all the requirements of the submission and approval processes, like regulatory and compliance aspects.
Wow. Excellent. So really the big lesson here, the big takeaway, actual support is that they are part of the process. They're not just the ones telling people what others have to go do. Very proactive, a lot of coordination. Maybe I know I said I would stop asking questions, but I have one. So I'd love to hear from everybody. If you could have a coordinator do one thing that could just make your reviews go smoother, that would reduce the expedited reviews, that would make it easier for you, what's one thing that you would love your coordinators to do? And if you are a coordinator, what is that big one thing that you do for your teams that they can't live without? That's the most important thing that they do. Just drop it in there. Would love to hear kind of what is that big thing that you wish would happen or that you do actually provide. Everybody, let's hear from you. Drop it in. I know one of the things that I hear a lot of folks tell us that they would love is when you're actually doing QA on the document to make sure that all the reviews were like all the notes have been rectified, and actually taking what could be this big long list of 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 comments and actually directing them to the person in their role that is best designed for doing that, right? Because otherwise you end up with what, legal commenting on font color, and you end up with
That's
the
right.
medical team trying to put words together. So what else do you see? The regulate material flow. I think it's hard to pick just one thing. I agree. Jeff, what do you find out of all the things that you had listed? What is like the biggest benefit? The thing that you get the most kudos, thank yous, congratulations from?
I think one thing kind of sticks out to me a little bit because in some of our therapeutic areas that we support, we have multiple disease states. And in some instances, it's very difficult to understand what reviewers need to review what. And the coordinators in place are the ones that understand that on the ground level, right? So they're very active in ensuring that the reviewers are the appropriate individuals that need to actually comment on the documents. If those people aren't the necessarily the right individuals in those meetings, nothing gets done, and then that material gets bumped to the next week.
Mm.
And so what happens? Delays, right? And then what happens when you have a delay? Expedited reviews. And then once again, those expedited reviews are putting pressure and difficulty on the reviewers that were probably supposed to be a part of that meeting in the first place. So there's a lot of roles and responsibilities that need to be managed efficiently through the process. And I agree with one of our attendees today. You can't pick just one if you don't have a process, a tool, and the right individuals to manage through that.
Absolutely. One of the things that jumps out to me is when you make this switch from being what you call it, the human report of just telling people stuff they could have read on the report, to helping them be successful. It's got to create a different type of relationship with the team that you're supporting. And that seems like it would be reflected in the customer satisfaction scores that you talked about at the beginning, that 95% or higher. Maybe just give us a black and white, like really specific. How do you measure that? How do you measure customer satisfaction or stakeholder satisfaction for a material review team?
Well, what we do is we can do it in two ways. And the first way is to measure the coordinator performance, right? But we just don't want to look at that because we do our own internal performance management on the coordinator. So we want to look at the entire process. So we conduct customer satisfaction surveys annually. We usually do that towards the end of the third quarter. So there's a chunk of time given over the given year to experience the process, right? And we solicit responses from everyone involved: content owners, reviewers, external agency partners, and we also dig into those individuals that have the highest frequency of interaction with the process and with the coordinators. So we also solicit contact information for those that want to provide it. We leave that optional so that we can have one-on-one conversations to solicit a little bit more detailed feedback beyond just clicking through a form or a smart sheet or an Excel spreadsheet. So we collect all that data. We create metrics to provide to leadership, and then we come with next steps based on the feedback and begin to work action items that hopefully improves the process from a themed perspective, right? We typically categorize what we hear from these surveys and begin acting on them to hopefully improve the process.
Awesome. Love it. If you don't measure it, you can't fix it. And so we need to have those measurements. Jeffrey, I have a question that came in offline, but I'm going to give you the question and then I'm going to ask everybody here another question. I know I said I wouldn't, but I want to. So the question that we're going to come back to you is, you've mentioned trackers a couple times and
Sure,
forms and things like that. I know you also are avid users of Vault and some of the traditional document processes. So in a moment, I do want to come back to, what are the tools that
sure,
you've had to build that fill the holes in some of those big tools. Okay.
sure,
But for everybody else, I just added a new poll to the program here, because I think this is probably one of the most important things that I've heard so far, which is around measuring that customer satisfaction, measuring that value, making sure that we're providing value, not just telling people what their role is. So I'd love to know from you, what is your CSAT score? So one, I have no idea, haven't asked. Two, don't collect it, but think it's pretty low. Don't collect it, but we have raving fans. We collect it and it's low or okay, or we collect this and it is amazing. So just put one, two, three, four, or five. Where are you sitting today? How many of you are even collecting it? We don't collect it. Okay. Thanks, Colleen, for telling us. Kelly, if you can drop, just, if you don't mind, just why? What's the biggest thing, right? Because we're here to answer questions. We're here to help. So if you have questions, drop it in. Megan, thank you also for sharing. Anybody who has a very specific question, drop it in anytime and we'll make sure that we're answering it. Okay. It can be scary. I remember when we first started collecting CSAT scores. If you have a belief that it is low, it can be scary to start collecting it, right? It can be really, really scary, right? Fear of collecting negative input. Yeah, lack of ownership, right? So one of the things that I've seen is that when we start proactively highlighting for the organization where there is a process opportunity, we are empowered to then fix it. One of my mentors, one of the top people that I've ever worked with, used to say, of all the people involved in the performance of a ship, who has the most influence over its performance? And people would always say it's the captain, it's the crew, it's the chef, it's the engine room. And what it came down to every time, though, is whoever designed that ship has more influence on how it performs than any member of the crew. And so you could have the very best crew with the very best people that are dedicated and motivated and trained. But if they're on a jet ski, they're not going to win a war. And if they're on a battleship, they're not going up a small river. And so we must, if we're going to be the program owner, collect this feedback, find out where the process is broken, and change the design of how it works so that those involved can perform better. So don't be afraid of calling it out. Get it. And Jeff, anything to add about that before you jump into the tools and tracker conversation?
well, you do bring up a great point, Scott, that you need that feedback. And if you don't speak up, you'll never know. Right. And I think at the end of the day, what we've found through soliciting comments and feedback on the entire process is that a lot of the sentiments are shared across the board for each phase of the process. And it's just a matter of truly addressing that and trying to figure out, well, how can we make this better? And then partnering with those individuals to help in that because they have a vested interest as well.
Got it. Jeff, tell us a little bit about you because the question came in. Tell us about some of the specific trackers forms and why can't you just do it all in Vault or whatever system somebody's using?
Well, I think we've used Vault before, obviously, in some Viva applications as the system of record, especially for this case study. But I think the importance of having a centralized tracking tool gives you the opportunity to execute on those aspects of the customer service process that we have been talking about, right? Because our coordinators are constantly updating those trackers. They're trying to understand how they can push things along very quickly. So they live in those trackers. And when they're teeing up the weekly agendas, that's a tool set that they can use based on feedback from the content owners. And we've typically used something like a smart sheet or something similar to make sure that we're tracking each not only each material, but each version that of that material. And like I said, every time you go in and make a change, you have a new version. So you've got multiple lines that you're managing. And it's also very good for capacity planning within the group. You need to know where the workload resides and you need to be able to lift and shift if somebody's getting a little overwhelmed with volume.
Thank you for sharing that. And this idea of bringing in that customer satisfaction score and fixing the process, this really is that last bullet you had around build a culture of improvement. How do you go about doing that? What does that culture look like?
Sure. I think processes in general they're always changing. So you kind of got to get ahead of the game, right? You kind of have to understand and try to anticipate. But some of the things that we've done, again, some of these things will sound so simplistic, but they make a huge mark on the overall process. But some of the improvements that our coordinators came up with and implemented was a centralized email box for enhanced efficient communication. It gets rid of the entire back and forth via email or losing a version in Teams or something that basically doesn't allow the process to actually function. And then as the team,
Tell us more. How does that work? What do you mean a centralized mailbox?
well, honestly, our mailbox is called MMR team at domain.com, right? And we generate our weekly meetings and agendas from that email box. It has its own calendar. We're constantly copying that email box on communications directly with the content owners and reviewers and agency partners. And it also gives us an opportunity that if we have a coordinator that's going to be out of the office on vacation, that backup coordinator has visibility into everything that they're working on through that centralized chain of
Hmm,
communication. So if you don't have that, sometimes things can get lost in the fray. But with that, it really helps.
got it. Wendy, thanks for sharing. Having one point of contact.
And as the team increased capacity, they used that capacity to put in additional QC steps, right? Like to continuously audit the flow, to continuously ensure the accuracy of the material going through the process. These are improvements that I think earlier someone said revise and resubmit. That can kind of cut down on some of that activity. It gives the coordinator the power to go in there and point things out before it gets to the final step of approval, so you don't have to go through some of that. And then we've implemented a lot of reporting, and a lot of that reporting is around volumes. It's around accuracy. It's around quality checks. And it also gives us the opportunity to not only capacity plan, but to improve the performance of our coordinators if there are certain elements that they struggle with. And then if we start to see some themes within that reporting, we can also develop additional guidance and training if we're seeing certain individuals from the submission or the review or the agency perspective to improve on as well. And that just goes to show that we're constantly doing development and coaching, not only with our coordinators, but with the external partners that we support on a day-to-day basis.
Wonderful. Jeff, I want to just do this is going to be hard. I know you weren't prepared for this, but I'm going to give you 5 rapid fire questions to give us the most practical first thing we can do today answer. Are you ready?
I hope so.
Okay. All right. So, of everything that you've done and everything you've talked to us, what is the biggest step you can take to increase capacity to be able to get to over 600 materials per coordinator?
So I think you have to go through that demand management exercise. I think you have to get rid of what I would refer to as the fluff. Demand management, proactive planning, 100% would start to cut down on unneeded activity.
Great. And how do you do that?
By partnering with your stakeholders, again, we said this a lot of times. The coordinators are not taskmasters; they're strategic partners. They have to be involved. They have to be an extension of that individual's team or that medical team. And in order to be able to do that, you've got to establish a great relationship, constant engagement, and you have to prove that you're trustworthy to be able to do that. And our team members do that every single day.
Awesome. Next one. You've told us how important that CSAT score is. If you could put one practice in today, what was the one biggest thing that leads to that type of relationship?
So I think one of our biggest challenges that we receive feedback on were expedited reviews, right? We talked about that and we put a lot more rigor behind the expedited approval process. What we did was we empowered our coordinators to be able to categorize what the expedites were. And then based on that, we were able to communicate and share that with the therapeutic area leads so that they understand that, oh, well, why are 80% of my materials considered expedites, right? And I think as a result of that, it really cut down on the like I said, on the capacity or it increased the capacity of the reviewers and some of the content owners. So that's a huge element to this. And that also goes hand in hand with trying to cut down on the number of materials a coordinator will support.
Got it. And one of the things that comes with those 6 product launches per year are these huge swings, huge spikes in demand. How do you handle the demand? How do you handle that kind of flux to when you have a small team?
Well, you've not only got to have backup, but you've got to have collaboration within your team. Right. It's almost like running a football, right? You got to have blockers in front of you to get to the finish line or get to the goal line, right? And I think if a launch presents itself and the person who's taking the lead on the launch, they have a backup, and then that backup gets pulled away from their capacity and someone else kind of swoops in. And it's a constant team effort, collaborative effort. And in most cases during a launch, we have a coordinator that may have a little bit of an ebb or flow and volume that can jump in and help at any time. And that's one of the things that I'm extremely proud of our team anyway, is that the collaboration is unprecedented.
Absolutely. Do you have anything else to add to Emmer's question around the complexity of launch versus regular reviews?
I think, see, how would you consider new product launch complexity on top of regular reviews? So obviously we talked a lot about proactive planning today. We do that. We do that with launches as well. We've established a role in addition to our MMR coordinators and their senior coordinators. And those senior coordinators are primarily responsible for executing the lead role on the launch. And then the coordinator that's responsible for that therapeutic area, who has the knowledge of the individuals in the background, acts as the backup for that particular launch. So that once we start to execute on the process, we have sufficient capacity and workload balancing. But again, proactive planning, we're asking every time we meet with our stakeholders, we're asking, "You got any launches coming up?" And then we've referred to the pipeline, right? We're always looking at the internal pipeline and what's coming down in Q1, 2, 3, and 4. And because we have visibility to that, we're asking the right questions in the right moments. Is that something that we need to be concerned about now, or do we need to be concerned about it later?
Awesome. Hey, Jeff, we have another question that came up from Colleen around relying on contractors to assist with high burden events. So, can you maybe talk about? So, I know you're serving as a outsourced coordinator role, but do you increase and decrease the volume of coordinators because of a particular event?
So if it has high visibility, certain, right? We have It just depends on the number of materials as well. If an event is coming down with, like, I think World is a good example. That's a pretty big congress in February where we've seen hundreds and hundreds of materials present themselves by therapeutic area, and it again it comes down to collaboration. We have a manager that does a great job of understanding where people have capacity at any given moment. And as a result of that, it becomes sort of a shell game, just so those individuals are jumping in to help when they can. Um,
Yeah.
yep,
So I think as I think about that question, our first goal is to make sure we're capacity planning to allow those who already know the process inside and out to be able to flex from global to a country, from one TA to another. And so our primary reaction to high burden events is to put our extra people on it versus bringing new people in that aren't necessarily
that's correct.
involved.
That's correct.
We also find that the coordinator role, in order to really execute on that process improvement work, it needs leadership, it needs coaching, it needs a manager. And guess what that manager does during a high burden event? Reviews materials, helps the
That's exactly
coordination.
right. That's exactly
So
right.
I know for some of you, it might feel a little bit daunting because you might not have two or three or four people in that coordinator role. But as we start to go, it's important to have people at the ready who are trained that can flex in and out more so than bringing in third party coordinators. In a small organization we work with, the executive MSL, that's one of the things that they've done. They've come in and they've been the backup coordinator to help because they understood the particular thing that was being reviewed. But again, it's one of those things where you really need that person ready to go. We have another question here from Megan. What metric would you say is most valuable in your experience to convince leadership that coordinators are actually necessary?
That is a great question. I think I can say two actually. You have to look at the volume because if you don't have a coordinator that's doing the work as an extension of your team, then you probably got multiple individuals doing the work, and it's inconsistent across the board, right? So I think if you look at the volume of materials and you look at the service level agreement tied to those materials and the amount of time it takes to get approved, I think those are very important because if you don't have a coordinator and you do have three or four individuals on your medical teams that are trying to actually get that through the process, one person's doing it in a week, another person's doing it in a month, and it's not consistent across the board.
Yeah. So I think volume, certainly as volume goes up, but the faster you start measuring those things that we showed you at the beginning, even if the numbers aren't great, it creates that case for change. So in your organization, if in your organization it is not clear that people dislike and they find it a drain and that it distracts them from doing other more important sometimes work, then there won't be a reason to change it. And so getting that feedback that through survey, through something somewhat formal is important. I would also say that looking at that volume of expedited and repeat reviews, that will be your biggest lever to increasing capacity, right? And so if you can put somebody in whose sole job is to plan capacity better so that things don't have to be expedited and doesn't just tell you it was due 3 weeks ago, but actually helps you get ready for review and then is there to make sure that by the time it gets to review that you've got all the materials that they're meaningful. What was that other thing you did, Jeff? You're doing concept reviews now where, hey, before we even send this thing in, let's just approve the concept, right? Because the material review committer reviewers will often be the ones who kill a document and it never comes back through, right? So those would be the types of things. And by getting those measures, getting those things documented, that's your biggest first step.
And coordinators also give the medical teams the opportunity to focus on their core competency and not a complex process.
That's right. Guys, I know we're just about out of time. Feel free to drop any other questions. Thank you for those that did. I do want to let you know that Jeff Tucker is one of the most amazing process medical leaders that I've ever had the chance to work with. The people that he gets to sit next to and engage know that he's there to help make their lives easier and better and drive outcomes. We get emails every week about this team and the work they do. So glad that you're here. If you have questions after today, feel free to send them. Would be remiss if I didn't share some of the ways that Jeff and his team help. So sometimes there's teams that are already doing a lot of the coordination in house and they just need some consulting. They need Jeff or a member of his team to come in and help set up those processes, help do the measurement, go ask the questions that maybe you won't get the honest answer to help create that case for change. And they'll just come in and help do that, give you some direction, and then they can exit. And then sometimes it's an entire staffing project. So Jeff has people on his team who do this coordinator role day in, day out, and they're great at it. So if anybody would like help doing this, either short term or long term, either just put the word help in the chat and we'll reach out to you directly afterwards, or reply to the email that you get with the recording and things and let us know. But it's one of those things where most people in medical affairs didn't get into this job because of their passion and their desire to do this type of process improvement, right? Like they care so much about the science and the content and the data that's why they are here. Our people are just as passionate about shaving an hour off of somebody's calendar as they are about that science. So I encourage you to reach out, let Jeff know if we can help, or put help into the chat and we will connect with you. Jeff, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
taking the time today. It was an absolute pleasure. And for anybody who is interested, you can scan this QR code. We have the brand new On Point Medical Excellence podcast that just launched, and we are so excited for our first 5 guests. They're all published, ready to go. You can log in today and start listening to these. Yes, we will share the slides. We will share the video recording, Colleen. It's all coming your way within the next couple of days. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful end of your week.